Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Saturday, August the 19th, 2023. Today I want to look at four horoscopes. Four horoscopes that relate to the United States. And I think that these four horoscopes, when we put them together, give us major cause for concern. I think the United States may be heading into something very serious, very dangerous, and I think these charts, they show this common signature. They come up again and again and again. This signature sort of gets distilled through these charts. And I do think at the end of the year, America could be heading into something very bad. Now, as far as context, I mean, historical context is concerned, I don't know much about American history. Obviously, I know that George Washington was America's first president, and as far as I understand it, he was one of America's best presidents. He understood his country, and I think he also understood the dangers that his country might be facing or might face in the future, in an almost kind of prophetic way. And in the end of the 1790s, when he decided to retire from public life, he penned his farewell address. I think he was helped by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. So I want to look at two paragraphs from his farewell address before looking at the horoscopes, because I think that the horoscopes kind of show the problem. So let me just show you what I'm talking about. So in his farewell address, which was a letter, we're not talking about something he spoke. So in this letter, I think it was a letter to the sort of American people, and he said, as avenues to foreign influence in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightened and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence or awe the public councils? Such an attachment of a small or weak towards a great and powerful nation dooms the former to be the satellite of the latter. Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of republican government. But that jealousy, to be useful, must be impartial, else it becomes the instrument of the very influence to be avoided, instead of a defence against it. Excessive partiality for one foreign nation, an excessive dislike of another, cause those whom they actuate to see danger only on one side, and serve to veil and even second the arts of influence on the other. Real patriots, who may resist the intrigues of the favourite, are liable to become suspected and odious, while its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. So what he was, I think, saying here is that America needs to be very careful about foreign influence, and it must be careful about not taking sides. You have to think about the context. People in America had they'd moved away from Europe, and I don't think George Washington really wanted European struggles and fights to have an impact on his country. Okay, at the time you had the Napoleonic Wars going on, but I think it tells us also something about what's going on. For example, with the Ukraine conflict. You have a situation where people's patriotism is questioned because they question whether it's really sensible to send all these billions of dollars to the Ukraine. And so I think, I think George Washington was really picking up on something important there. And of course, he didn't know about nuclear weapons, and you've got a real danger here of nuclear war. And because certain people in the United States insist on intervening in Ukraine, I think George Washington would not be at all happy about it. Maybe people are getting into the U.S. government, getting involved in the State Department, who are bringing in a load of baggage, their own ideological baggage, and they're kind of usurping the whole country and putting the country at risk. And I really do think we can see this with astrology. So let's start off by looking at the American chart, the United States chart, which I've already looked at very recently, but I just want to look at it one more time. Of course, I'll keep on looking at it. So here is the United States chart, and remember, foreign influence. That's what we're worried about. How the United States gets involved with foreign powers, and what can happen. There is its descendant. With this Mars-Uranus opposition. Okay, it's a wide Mars-Uranus opposition, but it's certainly there. And this is the first chart. I said that there are 4 charts that worry me. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about these 4 charts and how they interlink. And so this is the first chart that is of concern. Now, I suppose at the beginning in 1776, when the United States was born, we probably didn't see the full potential of this chart, and we maybe only started seeing the potential for the United States to cause itself and the rest of the world a lot of damage when the United States became the top country. So I suppose after the Second World War. And so after the Second World War, in a way, this chart became fully activated, and its full potential started to be seen. If this was a chart of, say, Luxembourg or Liechtenstein, well, we wouldn't really be too worried about it, would we? Because there are limits to what Luxembourg and Liechtenstein can do. But this is a chart of the most powerful nation on earth, and so it can do stuff. This sort of Mars-Uranus opposition, it is obsessed, I think, about its enemies. It feels it kind of almost needs to protect itself in a kind of an over-the-top way, and it has these projections, whether it's the war on drugs, whether it's the war against communism, it's obsession with the domino effect. In Vietnam War, it had to get involved because it was afraid of the dominoes falling in Southeast Asia. In Ukraine, they're starting to talk about the domino effect. So if you let Russia win in Ukraine, then the next domino is going to be Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland. And before you know it, there'll be Russian troops in London. So it's that paranoia with which I think comes with that Mars-Uranus. What it does is it really projects. In reality, the United States is the one causing turmoil in the world, and it has done since the Second World War, but it sort of projects it and says no, it's actually someone else causing the turmoil. So that is the chart. And as far as George Washington's farewell address is concerned, there are just people who have this attachment to places which America should have left behind long ago, like Ukraine or various countries in Eastern Europe. And yeah, these people have sort of managed to wedge themselves into the system, sort of burrow into the system and kind of change it. We looked at the chart of Victoria Nuland, who has seems to be who's is she Deputy Secretary of State or something like that? Who is obsessed with defeating Russia. That's not necessarily in America's national interest to go all out in Ukraine, but and I think that George Washington in his farewell address was really warning about people like Victoria Nuland, who are bringing baggage from Europe and subverting American politics and foreign policy. So as far as this chart is concerned, another thing about this chart that I talked about yesterday is Jupiter. Jupiter is ruler of the ascendant. United States has Sagittarius rising, and Jupiter's in Cancer. Is very well placed. It's exalted in Cancer, but Jupiter is incredibly sanctimonious. Jupiter just has strong beliefs. It believes it is right. And hence, I think it's a Jupiter that makes the United States so obsessed with regime change. America knows best. And that Jupiter's in the seventh house. The seventh house is the other. It's kind of a foreign policy house. In a national chart. So the Jupiter now explains why the United States does want to change regimes left, right, and centre, and just can't help itself. It's almost become compulsive. So that's the first chart. And what I really wanted to look at, wanted you to consider, and really be concerned about is that Uranus on the seventh house cusp. Now, America was declared its independence around the time that the planet Uranus was being discovered. I think it was a few years before the planet Uranus was discovered, and that this discovery of Uranus, the first discovered planet, and it's just so fitting that as Uranus was discovered, you have this country with Uranus on the seventh house cusp. Uranus, it's about terrorism, but it's a projected thing. America sees terrorists everywhere, but in the process, perhaps isn't aware of its own capacity to be a terrorist state. Like with the blowing up of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was an act of terrorist aggression, particularly against Germany, and so potentially cripples German industry. But I suppose America is a Cancerian country, and Cancerians can be very self-interested. And it's the national self-interest that matters. And again, I don't think that George Washington would be very happy about his country blowing up a pipeline in the Baltic Sea. This is not what America is about. I think there was an isolationist streak to George Washington. This is this is your country. You don't need to worry about what's going on in Europe. But yeah, so this is Uranus. Not just not accepting the reality of who one is. Now, the next chart I want to look at, remember that Uranus in the seventh, is the chart of Joe Biden. Now, remember Uranus in the seventh, Sagittarius rising, Jupiter in Cancer. Here's Joe Biden's chart, November the 20th, 1942. It's always interesting to me. I don't know quite what it means that he was born. He was born. Actually, we're talking about Uranus. He's got Uranus on the seventh house cusp, and he was born the day after Operation Uranus in the Second World War was launched. I think Operation Uranus was launched on November the 19th, 1942, and that was when the Soviet Union launched this massive counterattack against the Germans in Stalingrad and surrounded the city, and that directly led to the defeat of the Nazis in Stalingrad. Yeah, that was Operation Uranus, and I think that was launched in November the 19th, the day before before Joe Biden was born. Maybe at some level, as he was being born, he just got really concerned about Russians. He kind of picked up on what was going on in Stalingrad. Sorry, I'm just being flippant. So yeah, and he has Uranus in the seventh. He picks up on this thing that the United States has, this projection, and like the United States, he has Jupiter in Cancer. And he has Sagittarius rising. So that sanctimoniousness that is hardwired into the United States is shared by Joe Biden. And this capacity to project is shared by Joe Biden. And, now he's the US president. So in a way, he personifies the absolute worst possible thing, he personifies the worst of his country. I'm not trying to be negative about his country. I think someone accused me of anti-American bias a few months ago because they couldn't stand it anymore. But what I'm kind of saying, what I think George Washington would say if he was alive. He would say that the experiment, the project has been hijacked and subverted. So Joe Biden really personifies some of the big problems with his country. He personifies the capacity for real damage and disaster intrinsic to the United States. He's got that Uranus in the seventh. We could see that in a kind of a personal way. When I talked about Joe Biden and his first wife dying in a car accident in December 1972. In a way, that is kind of Uranus in the seventh house cusp. So his a partner dying in an accident, but now he's president. We can see it in a more collective sense. What does he think about what the United States did with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? Does he even know? Or maybe not. That's his chart. Another thing, as I've sort of pointed out before, he has a North Node at 0 degrees Virgo. That's where he wants to go. That's where he wants to put his energy, into the North Node. That's his way forward. North Node, ninth house, foreign countries. Ukraine. Ukraine declared its independence on August the 24th, so it has its sun at 0 degrees Virgo. He's got his North Node at 0 degrees Virgo. So I think this is a dangerous person to have as president. Now, you could say, okay, Obama he also had Uranus in the seventh house. This is not one of the four charts. But, okay, Obama's Uranus wasn't exactly on the seventh house cusp. It was sort of 7 degrees apart. Although we shouldn't forget that Obama, maybe it wasn't his fault. I think it was more the Secretary of State under Obama. Hillary was perhaps the one that caused a lot of damage. Under Obama's watch, you had the Arab Spring, where the United States just started undermining, the government in Libya, Syria, caused absolute chaos in the Middle East, which we're still living with. Many, hundreds of thousands of people were displaced, were killed. Millions, I think, because of America just not understanding the Prague Spring and just going back to its regime change thing. So Obama caused a lot of damage. Okay, maybe he didn't have the strength to stand up to his Secretary of State, or maybe it was Hillary that caused the damage, but really Obama was the president. He should have known better. And yes, he had Uranus in the seventh. And it was also when Obama was president that he started stirring things when Victoria Nuland goes to Ukraine and helps engineer the coup in the putsch or whatever it was in Ukraine, which led to a change of government, and elected government was got rid of, and that was the beginning of why we've got a problem now. So in a way, Biden had, a lot of it started with Obama, but it's still his Uranus in the seventh. It's not exactly there. It's 7 degrees off. But if we've got the correct time for Joe Biden, it is exactly there, and so we really have to be, aware of that. So this is the second chart. Now the third chart is a chart that was always going to happen. It was always going to happen from, I think, the 1950s onwards. The moment they changed the inauguration date. So I think when Roosevelt was inaugurated, I think he was inaugurated. I think in when he was elected, when he won the 1932 election. And when he became president in 1933, he was inaugurated in March. But I think after that, I think, was it Eisenhower was the first president? They started this inauguration in January. So from the sort of mid-20th century onwards, you would have known when, if you really wanted to look forward, you would have known when you would have known when a president elected in 2020 would have been inaugurated. Of course, he wouldn't have known whether he was a new president or whether he got a second term. So the inauguration chart, I think, is really important, and I've mentioned this, and I've been asked, well, why? What's the big deal about Joe Biden's inauguration chart? Okay, so let's show you. Now, this is his inauguration chart. Now, there are 2 times for Joe Biden's inauguration. In terms of the ceremonial sense, he was inaugurated at 11:49 a.m. on January the 20th, 2021. In a sort of legal sense, Trump, I believe, continued to be president until noon. So I could take the noon chart, I could take the 11:49 chart. They are going to be close, but there are some subtle things changed in that 11 minutes. So in terms of a legal moment that Joe Biden became president, this is the chart. And you will see that there is an exact Mars-Uranus conjunction. It is completely exact. It's not even, wide. You've got Mars at 640 Taurus, Uranus at 644 Taurus. Now, I wrote about this conjunction in my blog, this chart in my blog. I said this was dangerous. I said I thought, that I was really concerned about this. I mean, my basic view on this was that, from perhaps a sort of internal view in terms of domestic politics, maybe Trump is a disastrous president, is not a particularly pleasant president. But if you're into foreign policy, if that's what concerns you, then you'd probably want Trump to be president rather than Biden. But you can see, so you've got Mars-Uranus conjunction, which is square Jupiter. Now you might say, okay, Jupiter's a nice planet, a benefic, but no, Jupiter just makes things bigger. So Jupiter square Mars-Uranus is very dangerous. It is very explosive. This is the inauguration of a kind of president on whose watch, Nord Stream 2 pipeline blows up, and he's not even finished. I mean, he's going to be president at least for a couple of years, unless he drops dead. And we have Pluto on the midheaven. I think that this is important in the context of the fact that, for a number of reasons. Pluto on the midheaven is about power. It's about transformation. It's about obsession. Really being obsessed about control, controlling the economy, controlling the world. And I think that may be how Pluto on the midheaven may actually be working. And we shouldn't forget, though, that the United States is having its Pluto return. So just to remind you, USA in its natal chart has Pluto at 2733 Capricorn. So going back to the inauguration chart, Pluto's at 24, I can't read that, 24 something Capricorn. So the inauguration chart has Pluto on the midheaven in the run-up to the Pluto return. And the Pluto return is I think going to be about power. It's difficult to think about previous examples of Pluto returns because Pluto has a very long cycle. I did mention this in a video I made a few months ago in the context of England. So if you take England to have started with the coronation of William I on December the 25th, 1066, that chart is so long ago, 1,000 years ago, but actually England has had several Pluto returns. So we might have some idea about what Pluto returns might be about. One of its Pluto returns was during the reign of Mary I, where in the Tudor times, and that was all about religious persecution. You had a situation where it was just impossible for two groups of people with two separate beliefs to live in the same country. Either one group got persecuted, or the other group got persecuted. Mary I, was this Catholic monarch who was, if you were a Protestant, you were in trouble when Protestant bishops, archbishops got burnt at the stake. It was a completely intolerant system. That was the Pluto return in the 1550s. And of course it was temporary because as soon as Mary died, her sister took over and she was a Protestant, and kind of the opposite happened. So maybe that's saying something about what's going on in the United States. We've got this sort of intolerance, that it's either one group of people in control or another group of people in control, and those two people are completely at odds with each other, perhaps. That sense of that sort of persecutory environment, which some people feel. I'm not going to sort of comment on it. So, Pluto return, it's theoretically it's finished, but with in the 15 when the Pluto return had theoretically finished actually during Mary's reign. But still, it sort of seemed to presage the fact that she was going to die and her sister was going to take over, and you were going to have a complete sort of revolution there. I think a few years after the Pluto return was done, yeah, you had a change, and it was really dramatic. So that's the kind of thing that perhaps America is experiencing, although I understand people are not going to get burnt at the stake, but there is this growing, I think the polarization and intolerance that people are experiencing in the United States is partly caused by that Pluto return, and Biden has Pluto on his midheaven close to America's Pluto. Oh, sorry, Biden, the inauguration chart, has Pluto on the midheaven close to the United States Pluto. I think there is an obsession about power, and with the treatment of Trump, I don't want to give an opinion about Trump, but my feeling is that the Democrats are pushing it too far. Logically, if you want to get rid of Trump, you just ignore him, don't you? I mean, he's someone who thrives on publicity. If you keep prosecuting him, you turn him into a martyr, don't you? Isn't that how it works? I don't know, but I somehow think that Pluto on the midheaven, it's obsessive. Martyrs, but you had martyrs in the 1550s. Okay, Trump's not going to get burnt at the stake, but he is being turned into a martyr, perhaps. And I think that Pluto on the midheaven perhaps relates to it. So this inauguration chart is a real issue, I think. You also have this. I don't know if you can notice it, but here's the ascendant at noon is 14 degrees Taurus. It's about 8 degrees off Uranus. The midheaven is here, so it's about 7 degrees off Saturn. So in fact, you've got some symmetry here. If you see, you put midheaven ascendant, then Uranus and Saturn are sort of making that symmetry. So I think that you've got the ascendant midheaven midpoint on the, I think that would be the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, and I think the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So I mean, I think that symmetry is actually quite important there. Now, so I think overall, this is the third chart. This is the third chart, but to me, it repeats this theme. Uranus is not exactly on the 7th house cusp. It's still angular. It's pretty close to the ascendant. If I were to take the 1149 chart, Uranus would be even closer. So that is definitely something to worry about. It's a third chart, and it's a third. We're kind of getting closer to where things are. To getting an idea about where things are going to go wrong. We've got United States chart. Okay, fine. Until Joe Biden becomes president. Because his chart with that Uranus on the 7th chimed with the United States Uranus on the 7th. And then he gets inaugurated at a time when there's an exact Mars-Uranus conjunction. And finally, my final chart, the fourth chart I want to talk about, is Joe Biden's solar return. So the solar return is the point where the sun returns to where it was when someone was born. And so this is that's his natal chart. Remember, he's got Sun at 2734 Scorpio. And here is the solar return chart. And it's a really disturbing chart. I mean, okay, it might not be disturbing if you just looked at it in isolation without looking at the other three charts. But Uranus on the midheaven. I should say, when I do a solar return, I set it to the place of birth, and I don't use a sidereal solar return. This is the way I use it. One can argue about this, but that's the way I like to use solar returns. But even if you set this chart for Washington, D.C., I don't think it would have been that different. Scranton, Pennsylvania is not so far away from Washington, D.C., where I assume that's where he would be. Maybe not. But so this is his place of birth, assuming, of course, that we've got his birth time right. And you can see in this chart he's got Uranus exactly on the mid, not exactly, okay, but he's got Uranus on the midheaven, angular Uranus. We've got an angular Mars. Okay, not quite as close to the midheaven, but he's got Mars close to the IC. So he has got a Mars-Uranus opposition. Sort of repeated theme, remember? There's a Mars-Uranus conjunction in the Inauguration chart. He's got a Mars-Uranus opposition in a Mars-Uranus opposition in his solar return. And what is on the midpoint of his the Mars-Uranus opposition? Well, Mars is at 26 Scorpio, Uranus is at 20 Taurus, so the midpoint of that is going to be around 23 of the fixed signs, and the Moon is at 23 Aquarius, and the descendant is at 23 Aquarius. So all of the potential of the three charts that I've just looked at gets distilled into this solar return. And this, I think this solar return is completely extreme, completely over the top. Moon in Aquarius. The USA has its moon in Aquarius. Let's just show you the USA. There's its moon at 27 Aquarius, July the 4th, 1776. So when I look at that chart, I'm thinking, this is the final wheel in the combination, and I think that I'm feeling, I don't like to use the word confident, but I think given those four charts, I think the moment Joe Biden hits his birthday, 81, that's when things are going to get really, really nasty. Okay, he might not still be alive. He might be incapacitated, but, well, it's not enough to be incapacitated because he's still the president, unless he's actually not the president anymore. He's still there, and I'm not making a partisan point. This is just astrology. I'm not being partisan here. It's quite clear there's a big problem with Joe Biden, and I think his inauguration, all of these the solar return chart is kind of, the final horror of the whole thing. I don't know. What does one do? I think one just wants him not to be president after his birthday, given this return chart. So you see what I mean? It's like the signature, Mars, Uranus, Moon on the seventh house. If this is it, and I mean, okay. What might mitigate the problem would be if the Ukraine war was over. I talked at the beginning of this video, I talked about Ukraine, and it seems to be most likely that this return chart is going to manifest in terms of Ukraine. I mean, let's not forget that with Joe Biden's chart, if we relocate his chart, taking the same time but relocating it to Moscow, there's his chart relocated to Moscow. We've got Mars in the 7th. that's not good. Um, that suggests someone who is going to have problems with Russia. So we kind of really hope that we kind of hope the Ukraine war is finished by then, because otherwise, with this solar return, and if it's still going on, and if particularly if Russia is winning, who knows where this man and the people around him are going to stop. I think that, yeah, I think this situation is dangerous. But it might not even, it might be somewhere else. I mean, the United States doesn't just intervene in one place; it might be intervening in other places. So hopefully, they're not going to mess around in Taiwan. But anyway, I just wanted to look at these four charts. I understand I have repeated myself, but I wanted to kind of draw together some of the things I've said over the last few months and kind of put them all into one video. So anyway, I hope you found that. I hope you found that useful. Sorry to disturb you. Maybe you just. I know it is a bit disturbing, but I do believe that there is. Yeah, I do believe with those four charts that right now there is genuine cause for concern. Anyway, I will talk to you again very soon.